You think you know your family. The faces at the dinner table, the photographs tucked in albums, the stories whispered in quiet corners of the house. But what if I told you that some family lines are not just remembered? They are preserved, not by choice, not by love, but by something older, something far more deliberate. A single line, uninterrupted, carrying a legacy that refuses to die generation after generation. Imagine a family so determined to endure that their very survival becomes an obsession, a shadow over every birth and every death. And the truth, buried beneath years of careful discretion, is darker than anything we like to imagine. These are not just stories of inheritance or tradition. They are chronicles of compulsion, of a quiet terror that lingers behind closed doors. When a family line never breaks, it doesn't just persist. It possesses. It possesses its members, its neighbors, even the land they inhabit. And when you trace the roots of such a family, you find secrets so deeply entwined with their blood that to speak them aloud feels like desecration. Tonight, we are going to uncover one of those lines. A family whose reach, influence, and obsession with continuity has shaped generations in ways most of us cannot comprehend. You may think you are simply learning history, but in truth, you are stepping into a labyrinth of human obsession, cruelty, and devotion. A labyrinth designed to swallow the unwary whole. And as we trace the patterns etched into their lives, you will start to feel something creeping at the edges of your mind, the undeniable pull of something relentless, something that refuses to be forgotten, that refuses to die. Because some legacies are not meant to be broken, and some truths are never meant to be spoken. But tonight, we will speak them anyway. And in doing so, we may discover that what endures in a family is far more terrifying than what is lost. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. They say that every family has a skeleton in the closet, but some families have whole closets filled with bones, so many that the air itself becomes heavy with the weight of their choices. In families where the line never breaks, every decision is dictated not by love or chance, but by the imperative to survive, to continue to endure. Births are calculated, marriages are orchestrated, even deaths serve a purpose. And over time, the living become less like individuals and more like instruments, tuned to the rhythm of continuity, the cadence of survival. The family I want to tell you about did not simply want to exist, they demanded it. Their story begins in the late 1800s, a rural stretch of America where isolation can twist the mind as easily as it preserves secrets. There, a patriarch emerged whose obsession with his bloodline would echo for over a century. He was not a man of cruelty for cruelty's sake. His tyranny was quiet, meticulous, almost invisible. He believed that if the line were ever broken, everything, every value, every achievement, every whispered promise of greatness would vanish into nothingness. And so, a system was born. Children were trained not only in manners and religion, but in endurance. Every marriage, every offspring, was a careful alignment, a puzzle piece that must fit exactly to continue the sequence. Fail and you would be erased, forgotten, or worse. Over the decades, the family's influence spread quietly across the county. Their wealth grew, but so did the weight of expectation. A single misstep could shatter the delicate balance, and those who tried to leave were met with consequences that history often overlooks: disappearances, accidents, and whispers that became rumors that became fear. It is easy to romanticize endurance, to think of a family that survives for generations as strong or admirable. But in truth, the cost is never seen by outsiders. Behind closed doors, the family becomes a machine, each member a cog grinding under the pressure of an invisible demand. And as the decades pass, the line becomes less about legacy and more about obsession, a quiet horror that persists in smiles, nods, and the polite civility of a dinner table where no one dares speak out of turn. By the mid-20th century, the family's reach had stretched far beyond their rural origins. What began as quiet, obsessive preservation had transformed into something almost ritualistic. Birthdays, deaths, and marriages were no longer merely milestones. They were carefully measured points in a cycle, each observed as if the family's very existence depended on strict adherence. Children were schooled not only in academics, but in the unspoken rules of survival. They learned, often before they could read, that the line could not break, that mistakes were dangerous, and that curiosity, especially curiosity about the family's inner workings, was a threat. The patriarchs and matriarchs cultivated an almost religious reverence for continuity. In public, they appeared normal, even charming, a respected household with well-tended lawns and polite manners. But within the walls, the family was less a community and more a vessel of preservation. Secrets were passed down as carefully as recipes or heirlooms, whispered instructions carried from parent to child: who to marry, who to avoid, how to behave, how to carry oneself in a way that would honor the line. And with each generation, the psychological weight grew. Some children crumbled under it. Some rebelled and were quietly removed from the narrative entirely. Others absorbed it, their personalities bending under the invisible architecture of expectation, until they could not distinguish between their own desires and the family's will. And when a new generation arrived, the pattern repeated itself with eerie precision. The fear of failure, the terror of breaking the line, was internalized so deeply that the family members themselves became enforcers. They policed their own flesh and blood, reminding each other in subtle ways that the line, no matter what, must never falter. By the 1970s, outsiders began noticing oddities. Neighbors whispered about children who vanished for weeks, about distant cousins who never married, and about the obsessive rituals that seemed to govern holidays and family reunions. But no one asked too many questions. The line had survived for so long that it had become untouchable, a silent power in the background of ordinary life. And in that silence, the family's horror grew, not through violence, not through spectacle, but through something far more insidious: the suffocating, unbroken persistence of obsession. By the 1990s, the family's grip had shifted from subtle obsession to outright control. The line had endured, yes, but it had also warped. The children of the previous generation, molded by decades of unrelenting expectation, now held the keys to the family's continuity, and they wielded it like a weapon. Every relationship, every friendship, even every career path was scrutinized through the lens of preservation. Love was measured by its utility. Loyalty was assessed by its compliance. And anyone who threatened the line even slightly became an object of quiet eradication. It was in this period that the family's darkest traits became most visible, though still hidden in plain sight. Publicly, they maintained appearances: successful careers, polite interactions, community involvement. Privately, the descendants operated under a code that was rarely spoken aloud but universally understood. The line must never, ever break. Those who questioned it, those rare sparks of defiance, were subtly punished, not with cruelty that could be traced, but with social exile, economic pressure, or the slow erosion of reputation. And with each generation, the psychological burden intensified. Children were taught to monitor their own impulses, their own desires, to measure themselves against a standard that was both invisible and absolute. Rebellion became synonymous with doom, not just for the individual, but for the entire line. And yet something strange happened. The family's obsession with survival also cultivated ingenuity, cunning, and resilience. They learned to manipulate appearances, to mask dysfunction behind charm and wealth, to operate like shadows moving silently through a world that didn't know the true extent of their control. They became historians of themselves, archivists of secrets, curators of a personal horror museum that stretched across decades. And as the line continued, the tension between freedom and compulsion became almost unbearable. Imagine living every day knowing that your choices could unravel not just your life, but the carefully maintained continuity of generations. Imagine the quiet terror of realizing that in some families, survival is less about strength and more about fear. A fear that you inherit along with your name, your DNA, and the weight of unbroken blood. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the turn of the millennium, the family had evolved into something almost unrecognizable to outsiders, yet painfully familiar to those within. The obsession with unbroken lines had become more than a tradition. It had become a living organism, a silent force that dictated behavior, choices, even emotions. Children were no longer just raised. They were groomed, trained to understand instinctively the rules of survival and continuity. The line was no longer merely preserved by effort. It was enforced by fear so subtle it seeped into dreams. Every decision was filtered through the lens of lineage, careers chosen, partners selected, even friendships carefully weighed for their impact on the family's reputation. It was a tyranny of inheritance, invisible yet omnipresent. And yet, the family also cultivated a perverse sense of pride. They saw themselves as guardians, as stewards of something sacred, something too fragile to allow error. This duality, terror and reverence, manipulation and devotion, produced individuals who were both extraordinary and haunted. They moved through the world with a discipline and cunning born of generations of silent enforcement, but they carried with them a gnawing awareness of the invisible chains wrapped around their minds. Outsiders might see success, charm, or wealth, but inside the walls of the family home there was a quiet horror, a knowledge that freedom was an illusion and that the line could not and must not break. Letters and journals discovered decades later reveal the internal struggle of family members who oscillated between love for their kin and the suffocating weight of expectation. Some tried to escape, only to be drawn back by circumstance, guilt, or subtle coercion. And in rare instances, those who truly resisted vanished from history altogether, leaving behind only whispers of what might have been. It is here, at the intersection of devotion and obsession, that the family's legacy becomes almost inhuman. They are not simply survivors, they are something else entirely. A lineage that persists not because it is healthy or strong, but because it cannot stop. And as you sit and consider this, the haunting question remains: if your own family had rules like these, would you recognize them as protection or as a prison? What becomes most disturbing about a family line that refuses to break is not just the control, the careful orchestration, or even the fear, but the way it infects identity itself. Over generations, the line does not merely survive, it rewrites who its members are. Children are born not just into a family, but into a destiny preordained, a blueprint they never agreed to but must follow nonetheless. Names, traits, and even personality quirks become part of the inheritance, indistinguishable from blood. And as this pattern persists, the line develops its own consciousness, an almost sentient force that dictates behavior, punishes hesitation, and rewards conformity. By the time we reach the present day, descendants of this particular family live in a delicate equilibrium. Outwardly ordinary, successful, polite, and even admired, they are inwardly bound by the invisible weight of centuries. Every choice is informed by rules passed down through whispers, journals, and subtle threats encoded in tradition. The horror lies not in overt acts of cruelty, but in the internalized terror that members carry like a shadow. The line has become a parasite that feeds on its own descendants, ensuring continuity not through nurture or wisdom, but through obsession and fear. And yet, paradoxically, it also produces remarkable cunning, adaptability, and resilience. These are people who have learned to navigate a world they are not fully free to inhabit, capable of extraordinary feats while shackled by invisible chains. It is here, in this collision of brilliance and compulsion, that the true nature of the family's legacy is revealed, a persistent, unbroken echo of human obsession, a lineage that refuses to die, and a darkness that quietly waits for the next generation to inherit it. The lesson, if there is one, is chilling. Some legacies are not meant to be celebrated, they are warnings. And for those of us outside the line, the most terrifying truth is that such a family exists quietly among us, their history preserved in plain sight, their secrets buried beneath polite smiles and respectable appearances, their shadows stretching across time, waiting for no one. And now, as we confront the present, the full weight of this unbroken line comes into focus. What began over a century ago as an obsession with survival has become a living, breathing force, shaping every thought, every action, every relationship of those born into it. The family exists as a testament to continuity, yes, but also as a monument to quiet horror. Their homes, their traditions, their very names carry the imprint of generations who have sacrificed freedom for the line. And yet, there is no villain in the conventional sense, only the line itself, an unstoppable entity that moves through flesh and blood, bending human lives to its will. Descendants speak in careful tones about duty, loyalty, and responsibility, yet beneath the surface, attention coils like a serpent. Every gathering, every family reunion is a subtle reinforcement of the rules, a reminder that deviation is not merely discouraged, it is unthinkable. And when the line threatens to falter, the response is almost invisible: whispered admonitions, veiled threats, the gentle pressure of expectation that crushes without leaving a mark. In studying families like this, historians, psychologists, and observers are struck not by overt cruelty, but by the power of continuity itself. how the unbroken line becomes an agent, an almost sentient force shaping human behavior across generations. The legacy is both a warning and a fascination. It shows us what humans are capable of when survival, tradition, and obsession intersect. And it leaves a question hanging over every one of us. If your own blood carried a similar weight, would you recognize it? Would you fight it, or would you inevitably become part of it? There are families in every town, every city, every state, whose histories are quietly maintained, whose secrets are carefully curated. Most never reach the level of obsession we've explored tonight, but the potential is there, waiting, a reminder that the past is not gone. It endures, sometimes in ways that are uncomfortable, disturbing, and impossible to ignore. The story of a line that never breaks is not just about the past. It is about the unrelenting, haunting echo of human desire to persist, no matter the cost, no matter the horror it leaves behind. And as you close your eyes tonight, consider the legacy you carry, the line you belong to, and whether it is one that will survive, or one that will consume you.